Evelyn Carter, it says you're a librarian. What's a librarian doing with an invitation to a Navy ship's commemoration?
I got it in the mail. I suppose someone thought I should be here.
Evelyn Carter looked like any other civilian visitor as she approached the USS Liberty's anniversary celebration. Her gray hair and simple dress drawing dismissive glances from the young security team. When Chief Petty Officer Ryan Caldwell decided to make an example of the Trespasser and livestream her arrest, he had no idea he was humiliating the ship's former commanding officer, or that Admiral Hayes was about to remind everyone why respect is earned, not assumed. The USS Liberty sat majestically at her berth in Norfolk Naval Station, her steel hull gleaming in the morning sun as hundreds of visitors streamed aboard for the ship's 25th anniversary celebration. Families, veterans, and dignitaries mingled on the pier, their excited chatter mixing with the sound of military bands and the snap of flags in the harbor breeze. Among the crowd, Evelyn Carter moved quietly toward the gangway, her invitation clutched in weathered hands that bore the calluses of decades spent working with rope and steel. At 68, she had the unremarkable appearance of a retired librarian, gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and a modest navy blue dress that had seen better years. What they couldn't see was the way her eyes automatically assessed the ship's condition, noting fresh paint over old rust spots and the subtle signs of a crew that took pride in their vessel. They couldn't know that she'd walked these decks for 3 years as the Liberty's commanding officer, or that every rivet and weld held memories of storms weathered and battles won. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your invitation," said Seaman Rodriguez at the security checkpoint, his young face professional but kind. "Of course," Evelyn replied, handing over the embossed card. The invitation was formal, requesting the honor of her presence, but it bore no indication of why she'd been invited or who had requested her attendance. Rodriguez examined the invitation carefully, then checked his list. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see your name on the approved visitor roster." Evelyn felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "Perhaps there's been an oversight," she said quietly. "I received the invitation directly from the ship's command." As she spoke, she noticed a young chief petty officer approaching with his phone, already recording his expression, suggesting he'd found something entertaining. The live stream notification on his screen read, "Catching trespassers at Navy event, live." "Let me get my supervisor," Rodriguez said, stepping aside to speak into his radio. Evelyn watched the steady stream of visitors boarding the ship, unaware that her quiet dignity was about to be tested in ways she'd never experienced during 30 years of naval service. The woman who'd once commanded this very vessel was about to discover that respect once lost had to be earned all over again. But she'd also discover that some things like true leadership could never be taken away. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Caldwell approached the security checkpoint with his phone already live streaming, the viewer count climbing as his followers anticipated another entertaining security situation. At 32, he'd built a modest social media following by documenting what he called interesting encounters during his duties. "What seems to be the problem here?" Caldwell asked, positioning his phone to capture both Rodriguez and the elderly woman who was clearly out of place at a military event. "Sir, this lady has an invitation, but she's not on the approved list," Rodriguez explained. Evelyn observed Caldwell's approach with the trained eye of someone who dealt with difficult subordinates throughout her career. She noted his aggressive posture, the way he held his phone like a weapon, and the slight smirk that suggested he was enjoying the situation more than professional duty required. He's performing for an audience, she realized. This isn't about security, it's about entertainment. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification along with that invitation. Caldwell said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby visitors. Evelyn made a calculated decision. Rather than immediately reveal her military credentials, she would let Caldwell expose his true character to his online audience. Sometimes, the best way to teach a lesson was to let someone dig their own hole. "Of course, Chief," she said deliberately, using his rank to signal that she understood military protocol. "I'm happy to cooperate." The subtle emphasis on his rank made several nearby sailors look up sharply, but Caldwell was too focused on his performance to notice. As Evelyn handed over her driver's license, she watched Caldwell's reaction carefully. His eyes lit up when he saw her modest address, a clear indication that he judged people by their economic status rather than their character. Evelyn Carter. Caldwell read aloud for his live stream audience. "Says here you're a librarian. What's a librarian doing with an invitation to a Navy ship's anniversary celebration?" "I received it in the mail," Evelyn replied simply, her voice steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers. "I assumed someone thought I should be here." Let him make his assumptions, she thought. Let his audience see exactly what kind of leader he is. Caldwell laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Someone thought you should be here, ma'am. This is a military vessel, not a public library." The live stream was gaining viewers rapidly, Caldwell's followers drawn by the promise of drama. Comments began scrolling across his screen, some encouraging him to show the trespasser who's boss, others questioning why he was humiliating an elderly woman. "Sir," Rodriguez interjected quietly, "maybe we should just call the command duty officer. I am handling this seaman." Caldwell snapped his attention focused on his phone screen where viewer numbers were climbing rapidly. Evelyn noticed Master Chief Peterson watching from across the pier, his weathered face showing recognition. She caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent command to wait. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to expose someone's true character was to let them reveal it themselves. "You know what I think," Caldwell said, positioning his phone to capture Evelyn's reaction. "I think someone's grandmother got confused and showed up at the wrong place. Maybe she thought this was a cruise ship." The comment drew nervous laughter from some of the younger sailors, but Evelyn noticed that the older petty officers and chiefs looked uncomfortable. They recognized the signs of a junior leader who'd let a little authority go to his head. "Chief Caldwell," Evelyn said quietly, her voice carrying a note of command that made several nearby sailors straighten unconsciously. "I think you should reconsider your approach." But Caldwell was too caught up in his performance to recognize the warning signs that more experienced sailors would have heeded immediately. The woman he was humiliating was about to teach him a lesson in leadership that would be broadcast to thousands of viewers. Caldwell's live stream exploded beyond his expectations, with viewer numbers climbing past 2,000 as the video was shared across social media platforms. The hashtag #YourNavyGrandma was trending, and military personnel from bases around the world were tuning in to watch the unfolding drama. "All right, folks," Caldwell said to his phone camera, "let's see what other stories our trespasser here wants to tell us." Unknown to Caldwell among his viewers was Admiral Preston Hayes, who was monitoring social media from his office at the Pentagon. Hayes had recognized Evelyn immediately, and his phone calls were already setting wheels in motion. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under detention for attempted trespassing on a military installation," Caldwell announced, pulling out zip-tie restraints. "You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you'll use it." The crowd of onlookers had grown to include families with children, elderly veterans, and several junior officers who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the spectacle. But none of them outranked Caldwell in this situation, and military protocol demanded they defer to his authority. "This is really unnecessary," Evelyn said calmly, but she allowed him to restrain her. Let him commit fully to this course of action, she thought. Let there be no doubt about his character. What Caldwell didn't realize was that his live stream had been picked up by military social media accounts, and veterans across the country were sharing the video with growing outrage. The comments section had become a battleground between those who supported his actions and those who recognized something familiar about the dignified woman being humiliated. "Chief," said Lieutenant Martinez, a young officer who'd been escorting dignitaries, "this seems excessive. Maybe we should, Lieutenant, with respect, security is my responsibility." Caldwell cut him off his phone, still recording. "And right now, I have an unidentified civilian attempting to board this vessel." In his office at the Pentagon, Admiral Hayes was coordinating with Norfolk Naval Station's command. "I want a helicopter ready in 10 minutes, he told his aide. "And get me the Liberty's commanding officer on the phone immediately." The first crack in Caldwell's confidence came when Master Chief Peterson approached, his face grim with recognition and growing anger. "Chief Caldwell," Peterson said carefully, "I really think you should reconsider this course of action." "Master Chief, I've got this under control," Caldwell replied, not wanting to share his moment of authority. "Just keep the crowd back." But Peterson's eyes had met Evelyn's, and 28 years of naval service had taught him to recognize command presence when he saw it. The way she carried herself, despite the restraints, the calm authority in her voice, the subtle way other senior enlisted personnel were gravitating toward her, it all pointed to someone with significant military experience. "Chief," Peterson said more urgently, "you need to look at her military ID now." "I don't need to look at anything," Caldwell snapped. "She's a civilian trespasser, and she's going to be processed accordingly." The live stream comments were becoming increasingly critical as viewers began researching Evelyn Carter's background. Someone had found her Wikipedia page, others were posting links to news articles about her naval career, and the tone of the conversation was shifting rapidly from entertainment to outrage. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the Liberty's executive officer, pushed through the crowd with an expression of growing horror on her face. She'd received an urgent call from the ship's commanding officer who'd just gotten off the phone with Admiral Hayes. "Chief Caldwell," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" "Ma'am, I'm detaining a trespasser who attempted to board the ship with questionable credentials," Caldwell replied, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Walsh looked at Evelyn, taking in the zip ties, the scattered contents of her purse, and the phone still recording the entire incident. "Chief, do you have any idea who this woman is?" "Some retired Navy librarian who thinks her old service gives her special privileges," Caldwell said, but he was beginning to sense that something had gone very wrong. Walsh's face went pale as she processed the situation. "Chief, this is Commander Evelyn Carter. She's not just any retired officer, she's the former commanding officer of this ship." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Conversation stopped. Phones came out to record the unfolding disaster, and Caldwell's live stream exploded with comments as viewers realized they'd just witnessed the humiliation of a decorated naval officer. "That's impossible," Caldwell stammered, but even as he said it, he could see the recognition dawning on the faces of the senior sailors around him. The viral video that was supposed to showcase his authority had just become evidence of the worst mistake of his career broadcast live to an audience that was growing by the thousands. The sound of helicopter rotors filled the air as Admiral Hayes's aircraft approached Norfolk Naval Station, but Caldwell was too focused on his disintegrating situation to notice. His live stream had exploded to over 5,000 viewers, and the comments were overwhelmingly hostile as military personnel worldwide recognized what was happening. "Sir Admiral Hayes is en route," Lieutenant Commander Walsh informed Caldwell, her voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "He'll be here in 5 minutes." Caldwell's face went ashen as the implications hit him. Admiral Hayes was a legend in the Navy, known for his zero tolerance of incompetence and his fierce protection of naval traditions. The fact that he was personally responding to this incident meant Caldwell's career was about to end in spectacular fashion. "Ma'am," Caldwell said to Evelyn, his voice cracking, "maybe we can work this out." "Chief," Evelyn replied quietly, "you've made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences." The crowd on the pier had grown to several hundred people, drawn by the commotion and the growing realization that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Phones were recording from every angle, ensuring that Caldwell's humiliation would be preserved for posterity. For the first time since the incident began, Caldwell was forced to confront the reality of what he'd done. The woman standing before him wasn't just any retired officer, she was a decorated war hero who'd commanded the very ship he was supposed to be protecting. "How did I get this so wrong?" he thought, watching his viewer count climb past 10,000 as the video was shared across military social media networks. "How did I not see what everyone else is seeing?" The live stream comments were brutal. "This idiot just humiliated a Navy Cross recipient." "Someone's about to lose their career." "This is what happens when you give authority to people who don't deserve it." "Chief," Master Chief Peterson said quietly, "you need to cut those restraints off her right now before the Admiral gets here." "I can't," Caldwell replied, his voice barely audible. "If I cut her loose now, it'll look like I'm admitting I was wrong." "You were wrong," Peterson said firmly, "and every second you wait makes it worse." But Caldwell was paralyzed by the magnitude of his mistake and the knowledge that his humiliation was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers. He'd built his social media following by exercising authority over others, and now that same audience was watching his downfall in real time. Admiral Preston Hayes strode down the pier with the purposeful gait of someone accustomed to command his expression, a mixture of recognition, respect, and barely controlled fury. At 65, Hayes carried himself with the dignity of 4 decades of naval service, and his presence immediately transformed the atmosphere on the pier. "What in God's name is happening here?" Hayes demanded, his voice carrying the authority of flag rank across the pier. Caldwell, still holding his phone and streaming live to an audience that had grown to over 8,000 viewers, found himself face to face with an admiral whose reputation for not tolerating incompetence was legendary throughout the fleet. "Sir, I was detaining a trespasser who attempted to board the ship with questionable credentials," Caldwell said, his voice cracking under the pressure. Hayes looked at Evelyn, taking in the zip ties, her dignified bearing, despite the humiliation and the scattered contents of her purse. His face went through a series of emotions: recognition, disbelief, and finally a cold anger that made everyone within earshot take a step back. "Chief Caldwell," Hayes said, his voice deadly quiet, "do you know who this woman is?" "Sir, she claims to be some retired commander, but—" "She doesn't claim to be anything," Hayes interrupted, his voice rising. "She is Commander Evelyn Carter, United States Navy, retired. She's also the former commanding officer of this vessel and the recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism." The pier fell silent except for the sound of waves lapping against the hull and the distant cry of seagulls. Caldwell's livestream was recording every word, broadcasting his humiliation to thousands of viewers who were beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Furthermore, Hayes continued, his voice carrying across the pier, "She saved 73 lives when the ship caught fire in 2020. She ran into burning compartments to rescue trapped sailors, suffering smoke inhalation herself. She's one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege to serve with." Caldwell's phone slipped from his nerveless fingers, ending the live stream that had just destroyed his career and reputation in front of thousands of witnesses. Hayes stepped closer to Evelyn, his expression softening as he addressed his former colleague. "Commander Carter, I am profoundly sorry for this treatment. This is not how the Navy honors its heroes." "It's quite all right, Admiral," Evelyn replied with characteristic grace. "I'm sure Chief Caldwell was just doing his job as he understood it." But Hayes wasn't finished. He turned to address the growing crowd of sailors, visitors, and media representatives who had been drawn by the commotion, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I want you to know exactly who this woman is and what she's done for our Navy and our country." He gestured to Evelyn, who stood quietly, despite the restraints still binding her wrists. Commander Evelyn Carter commanded the USS Liberty from 2018 to 2021. During her tenure, she led this ship through some of the most challenging operations in recent naval history. The crowd stirred as Hayes continued, his words being recorded by dozens of phones and broadcast live across social media platforms. But more importantly, in 2020, when a catastrophic fire broke out in the Liberty's engine room during a training exercise, Commander Carter personally led the firefighting efforts that saved this ship and the lives of 73 sailors. Several of the older sailors in the crowd began to nod in recognition, remembering the incident that had made headlines throughout the fleet. She was awarded the Navy Cross for her actions that day, Hayes continued, his voice carrying across the pier. She ran into a burning compartment filled with toxic smoke to rescue trapped sailors, making multiple trips despite suffering smoke inhalation herself. 3 sailors owe their lives directly to her personal courage. Caldwell's face had gone ashen as he realized the full scope of his mistake. His dropped phone was still recording, and someone had picked it up to continue broadcasting the scene to his audience. "Chief Caldwell," Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you will immediately remove those restraints and apologize to Commander Carter." "Sir, That was not a request, Chief. That was a direct order from a flag officer." Caldwell fumbled with the zip ties, his hands shaking as he cut them away from Evelyn's wrists. The marks they'd left were clearly visible red welts that would serve as a reminder of this moment for days to come. "Commander Carter," Caldwell said, his voice barely above a whisper, I apologize for my actions. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Evelyn replied quietly. "You made assumptions based on appearance rather than taking the time to understand the situation." Hayes stepped forward, his expression stern, as he addressed not just Caldwell, but the entire crowd that had gathered to witness the spectacle. "Chief Caldwell, you have just humiliated a decorated war hero in front of thousands of people. You've live-streamed the degradation of someone who has given more to this Navy than you can possibly imagine." The Admiral's words carried across the pier and through the social media streams that were broadcasting the event live. Military personnel around the world were watching as one of their own was held accountable for his actions. "But this isn't just about Chief Caldwell," Hayes continued. "This is about all of us. This is about how we treat people, how we make assumptions, and how we honor those who have served." He turned to Evelyn, his expression respectful. "Commander, would you do us the honor of boarding your former command? I believe there are some sailors aboard who would very much like to thank you for saving their lives." Evelyn nodded, her dignity intact despite everything she'd endured. "I would be honored, Admiral." As they walked toward the gangway, Hayes addressed the crowd one final time. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here. Respect is not determined by appearance, age, or civilian clothes. It's earned through service, sacrifice, and character. Commander Carter has all 3 in abundance." The crowd parted as Evelyn walked up the gangway to her former ship, her head held high and her bearing unmistakably that of a naval officer. Behind her, Caldwell stood alone, watching his career and reputation crumble as the video of his mistake continued to spread across the internet. Sailors lined the deck as Evelyn boarded, many of them recognizing her from the stories they'd heard about the fire that had nearly claimed the Liberty. Some were crew members who'd served under her command. Others were new sailors who'd only heard the legends. "Attention on deck," called out the officer of the deck as Evelyn stepped aboard. "Commander Carter, United States Navy, retired." The traditional announcement echoed across the ship, a recognition of her rank and service that had been denied to her just minutes earlier. Sailors snapped to attention, offering the respect that should have been hers from the moment she'd approached the gangway. At the ship's quarterdeck, Admiral Hayes turned to face Evelyn and rendered a crisp salute, a gesture of respect from one officer to another, and a public acknowledgement of her service and sacrifice. "Welcome aboard, Commander," he said. "Welcome home." Evelyn returned the salute, her eyes bright with unshed tears. For a moment, she was no longer the humiliated woman in zip ties, but the commanding officer who had once led this ship and its crew through their darkest hour. The image of the Admiral saluting the woman who had been handcuffed just minutes earlier was captured by dozens of cameras and would become one of the most shared photos in naval history. A powerful reminder that true leadership recognizes and honors service regardless of the circumstances. Behind them, the viral video that had started as entertainment had become a lesson in humility, respect, and the consequences of judging others by their appearance rather than their character. 1 year later, Virginia Beach Community Center, the Carter Foundation for Veteran Transition Services, occupied a modest building in Virginia Beach, its walls lined with photos of veterans who had found new purpose through the organization's programs. The viral video that had humiliated Evelyn Carter had been viewed over 50 million times, but rather than hiding from it, she had transformed it into a national movement for veteran support. The foundation has helped over 500 veterans transition to civilian careers, Evelyn told the reporter from Navy Times. We focus on matching their military skills with civilian opportunities, but more importantly, we help them understand that their service has value regardless of how others perceive them. The interview was taking place in the Foundation's main conference room, where a large screen displayed the viral video that had started it all. The footage of her humiliation had become a teaching tool used to train corporate recruiters and government officials about unconscious bias and the importance of looking beyond appearances. What the reporter didn't know was that Ryan Caldwell was working in the Foundation's warehouse, sorting donated clothing and furniture for veteran families. He'd been discharged from the Navy 6 months after the incident, his career destroyed by the viral video and subsequent investigation. But Evelyn had quietly offered him a job when no one else would hire him. Forgiveness isn't about making someone feel better about their mistakes, Evelyn had told her staff when they questioned the decision. It's about choosing not to let their actions define your future. Caldwell worked under his real name, now his identity known to everyone, but his past no longer defining him. He'd never asked for forgiveness, understanding that some mistakes couldn't be undone with words. Instead, he worked quietly, helping veterans who reminded him daily of the service he'd once mocked. The Foundation's success isn't measured in dollars or publicity, Evelyn concluded the interview. It's measured in the veterans who find their way back to purpose and in the community that learns to see past appearances to recognize the heroes among us. As the reporter packed up his equipment, Evelyn walked to the window overlooking the warehouse, where Caldwell was training a new volunteer, a young veteran who'd lost a leg in Afghanistan, but had found new purpose in service to others. The viral video that was meant to humiliate had instead become a testament to the power of dignity in the face of injustice, and the foundation it inspired would help veterans for generations to come. Some lessons she'd learned could only be taught through grace, and some people could only learn them through the consequences of their own actions.